It is called the national instrument of Japan. A long, curved body of paulownia wood, strung with 13 shimmering strings, each one lifted by its own small bridge like the scales along the back of a sleeping dragon. Its sound is unmistakable. Bright, watery, and instantly Japanese. You have heard it in temples and tea houses, in films and video games, in the quiet music that seems to carry the whole feeling of a country in a single phrase. But this instrument is not, originally, Japanese at all. Its story begins in another empire, crosses the sea more than 1,000 years ago, and is transformed again and again by emperors, by court ladies, and by two blind musicians whose genius changed it forever. This is the history of the koto. To find the koto's beginning, you have to leave Japan entirely, and travel west, to ancient China. China is home to one of the oldest and richest families of stringed instruments in the world, the long zithers. A zither, at its simplest, is a set of strings stretched over a long wooden-sounding box. Among the most important of these is an instrument called the guzheng, a graceful zither with movable bridges, plucked to produce cascading, rippling melodies. For thousands of years, instruments like the guzheng were central to Chinese music, played at court, in scholarly gatherings, and in ceremony. And like so much of Chinese culture, writing, religion, art, and government, these instruments would eventually travel outward, carried across all of East Asia. This is one of the great quiet stories in the history of music, how a single family of instruments spread across an entire civilization. The same route that produced the guzheng in China also gave Korea its gaeum, and Vietnam its dan tran, each one a cousin, each adapted to a different people, a different language, a different soul. The koto is the Japanese branch of this vast and ancient family tree. One of the places they reached was a group of islands off the eastern coast of the continent. A place that was, at that time, hungrily absorbing the brilliance of its giant neighbor. That place was Japan. The koto arrived in Japan during the Nara period, around the 8th century, over 1,200 years ago. This was a defining moment in Japanese history. Japan was building its first great capitals, modeling them on the splendor of the Chinese court. It was importing Buddhism, a writing system, art, and ceremony wholesale. And along with all of that came music, including the zither that would become the koto, already carrying its 13 strings. At first, the koto was not a folk instrument, or a thing of the common people. It was the opposite. It entered Japan at the very top of society, as part of an elegant and highly formal court music known as gagaku. Gagaku, which means, roughly, elegant music, was the refined ensemble music of the imperial court, performed for the emperor and the aristocracy. And it survives, astonishingly, to this very day, making it one of the oldest continuously performed orchestral traditions on earth. In those early centuries, the koto was one voice within that ensemble, a thread of sound woven among flutes, mouth organs, and drums. But it would not stay in the background forever. To hear gagaku today is to hear a living fossil. The slow, otherworldly, almost timeless music performed now in the halls of Japan is, in its bones, the same music that echoed through the imperial court more than 1,000 years ago. Empires have risen and fallen, the whole world has transformed, and yet this fragile thread of sound has been passed, unbroken, from one generation of court musicians to the next. The koto was there at the very beginning of it. As Japan moved into the Heian period, its court flowered into one of the most exquisite aristocratic cultures the world has ever seen. And the koto flowered with it. For the nobility of Heian Japan, art was not a hobby. It was the very measure of a person. To be admired, an aristocrat was expected to write poetry, to blend incense, to master calligraphy, and to play music. And the koto became one of the most prized accomplishments of all, especially for noble women, who played it in the shadowed, screened-off rooms of the palace. We know this because it is written into the greatest work of Japanese literature. In the tale of Genji, often called the world's first novel, written by a court lady around 1,000 years ago, the koto appears again and again. To play it beautifully is a sign of refinement, of sensitivity, of soul. A few notes drifting from behind a screen could make a nobleman fall in love with a woman he had never even seen. This was a culture intoxicated by beauty and by feeling, by mono-no aware, the bittersweet awareness of how fleeting and precious everything is. And few sounds captured that feeling like the koto, a single plucked string, swelling and then fading slowly into silence, a perfect small image of impermanence. To the Heian aristocrat, the koto was not mere entertainment. It was a way of touching something deep, and sorrowful, and true about being alive. The Japanese came to love the instrument so deeply that they described its very shape in the image of a dragon. The long curved body became the dragon's back. Its parts were given names like the dragon's head, the dragon's tail, the dragon's tongue. To hold a koto was to lay your hands upon a living creature of myth. But for all its beauty, the koto of the court was still bound by tradition, formal, restrained, and reserved for the highest ranks. To truly come alive, it would need to be set free. And the man who freed it could not even see it. His name was Yatsuhashi Kengyo, and he is the father of the modern koto. Born in 1614, Yatsuhashi was blind. In the Japan of his time, music was one of the few honored professions open to blind men, who organized themselves into guilds and could rise to the respected rank of Kengyo, the highest title a blind musician could hold. He began as a master of the shamisen, the three-stringed lute, but it was the koto that would carry his name down the centuries. This detail is worth pausing on. In old Japan, blind men were organized into a powerful, self-governing guild. Within it, a blind musician could train, earn rank, and command real respect in a society that otherwise had little place for the disabled. Music was not charity for these men, it was a profession, a craft, and a path to honor. And it is no accident that two of the most important figures in the entire history of the koto, separated by 300 years, were both blind. The story of this instrument is, in part, the story of what the blind could hear in sound that everyone else had missed. Yatsuhashi did something revolutionary. He took the koto out of the exclusive world of the imperial court and remade it for a wider Japan. He developed a new tuning, one that fit the popular melodies and emotional scales of ordinary Japanese music, rather than the ancient imported court system. And he composed a whole new body of music for the koto as a solo instrument, music to be listened to for its own sake. Among his works is a piece still considered a cornerstone of the repertoire today, Rokuden no Shirabe, music of 6 steps, a set of variations that unfolds with hypnotic, building beauty. With pieces like this, Yatsuhashi transformed the koto from one color in a court ensemble into a powerful solo voice, capable of carrying an entire performance alone. He is the reason the koto became the people's instrument, and the heart of a whole tradition of chamber music. In the centuries that followed, the koto spread far beyond the palace and the temple. In the towns of Edo period Japan, it became a treasured accomplishment for the daughters of good families, a mark of refinement and a proper part of an upbringing. Music shops sold koto scores, teachers took on students, whole networks of players and composers grew up around the instrument. The koto had completed an extraordinary journey, from the exclusive plaything of emperors to a beloved instrument woven into the everyday cultural life of an entire nation. After him, the art split and grew. Different masters founded different schools, each with its own style, its own techniques, even its own subtly different instruments and fingerpicks. Two great schools in particular came to dominate, one leaning toward instrumental brilliance, the other toward the marriage of Koto and the human voice. For centuries, these traditions passed the music down, master to student, hand to hand. The two great schools still carry the names of their founders. The Koto school, begun in the 17th century, favored a brilliant, instrumental style and a square-cornered pick, and tied the koto closely to the shamisen lute. The Yamada school, founded about a century later, leaned toward storytelling and song, building its music around the beauty of the human voice. A student of the koto, even today, generally belongs to one tradition or the other, a living link reaching straight back to those founding masters. So what exactly is this instrument that captured a nation? A koto is large, roughly 6 feet long. Its body is traditionally carved from the wood of the paulownia tree, a light, resonant timber prized for its warm tone. Across that long body stretch 13 strings, once made of twisted silk, today usually of nylon or polyester for durability and brightness. The secret of the koto's sound lies in 13 small, movable bridges, one beneath each string. By sliding these bridges along the body, the player tunes the instrument and can even retune it in the middle of a performance to shift its entire mood. The right hand plucks the strings with picks called tsume, worn like claws on the thumb and first 2 fingers. And the left hand presses and bends the strings on the far side of the bridges, pulling the pitch upward, adding shimmering ornaments and that famous, weeping slide that no piano or guitar can quite reproduce. It is an instrument of subtlety. A single note can be bent, colored, and shaped until it seems almost to breathe. In the right hands, 13 strings of wood and wire can sound like falling water, like wind through pines, like the sea. Learning to play it is the work of a lifetime. The player sits or kneels beside the long body of the instrument, and what looks, from a distance, like a few simple plucks is in truth a dance of extraordinary precision, the right hand striking, the left hand bending and silencing, the whole body still and composed while the music pours out. In Japan, to study the koto has long been considered not merely a musical training, but a training of character itself, of patience, of discipline, and of grace. And it was the sea, in fact, that inspired the koto's next great revolution, led, once again, by a blind genius. His name was Miyagi Michio, and he was born in 1894, into a Japan that was throwing open its doors to the entire world after centuries of isolation. Miyagi lost his sight as a child, and like the blind masters before him, he turned to the koto, becoming a virtuoso while still a teenager. But Miyagi lived in a new age. Western music was pouring into Japan, pianos and violins, symphonies and scales from across the ocean. Where others saw a threat to tradition, Miyagi heard an opportunity. He became the first great composer to fuse the ancient sound of the koto with the harmony and structure of Western classical music, creating something that belonged fully to neither world, and beautifully to both. Think about how bold that was. The Japan of Miyagi's youth was a nation in the middle of a dizzying transformation, racing to modernize, and many feared that the country's ancient arts would simply be swept away and forgotten in the rush toward the West. Miyagi's answer was not to wall the koto off and guard it like a relic. It was to let it speak to the new age directly, to prove that a 1,000-year-old instrument still had something fresh, and urgent, and necessary to say. In doing so, he may well have saved it. His masterpiece is called Haru no Yumi, The Sea in Spring. Written for koto and the Japanese flute, it paints a gentle, sunlit seascape, the koto rippling like water beneath a soaring melody. It became famous around the world, and to this day, its opening notes are the sound of the Japanese New Year, played across the country every January. It is perhaps the single most beloved piece of Koto music ever written. It was a turning point not just for the Koto, but for the way the world heard Japanese music. The piece traveled far beyond Japan's shores, at one point famously performed with the Koto's flute line carried instead by a Western violin, proof that the Koto's ancient voice could speak to anyone, anywhere. A sound born in the Chinese imperial court, carried across the sea to a Japanese palace, and set free by blind masters, was now circling the entire globe. Miyagi did not stop at composing. He was a restless inventor. He created new playing techniques, wrote hundreds of new works, and most dramatically, built entirely new instruments. His greatest invention was the 17-string bass koto, a larger, deeper cousin of the traditional 13-string instrument, designed to give koto music a powerful low foundation it had never had before. That 17-string koto is now a standard part of the modern koto world. Through Miyagi, an instrument over 1,000 years old stepped confidently into the 20th century, no longer a museum piece, but a living, growing voice. And that is where the koto remains today, alive. You will find it, of course, in the concert halls and tea ceremonies where its classical repertoire is lovingly preserved. But you will also find it far beyond them. The koto's unmistakable voice rings through the soundtracks of films and animation, through video games, through modern pop and experimental music. Contemporary performers carry it onto world stages, blending its ancient tone with jazz, with electronics, with the music of every continent. It remains the national instrument of Japan, a 13-stringed dragon, carved from Paulownia wood, that has been singing for more than 1,000 years. So think back, one last time, over the journey of this single instrument. It was born in ancient China, a zither among zithers. It crossed the sea to Japan and rose to the very top of an imperial court, played by emperors and by the noble women of the tale of Genji. It was set free by a blind master in the 17th century, who gave it to the people. And it was reborn for the modern world by another blind genius, who taught it to sing alongside the music of the West. 13 strings. A body shaped like a dragon. And a sound that, after more than 1,000 years, still carries the whole quiet soul of Japan. If you enjoyed this journey through the history of the koto, subscribe and stay with us for more of the hidden histories that shaped our world.